want to welcome you to another episode of Recovery Today, sponsored by the Recovery Resource Center here in Salisbury, Maryland. My name is Perry Gadurgis. I'm the host of the show. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I have not had a drink or a drug in almost 42 years. I'm also a person that has multiple generations of folks that are in recovery from both addiction and mental health concerns, or what we call co-occurring issues with people that suffer from substance use disorder. In our show, we explore multiple topics and areas for our local resources and sometimes national resources around the pathways of recovery and the ways people experience it. And we're drawing down on a subject today that I feel is very, very important, comes very close to my heart. I'll share about that a little later. So our guest today to this topic is about suicide awareness. And our guest today is Kim Klump, who is the founder of the Jesse Klump Memorial Fund. And I want to welcome you to the show, Kim.
Thank you, Perry. Thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I've heard a lot of great things about you and the work that you do. Seen a little bit of it in the media over the years with some of the fundraising activities that you've done and the programs and the services of support that you offer to folks that are dealing with suicide prevention, suicide sort of services or education and support. And so I wanted to drill down on that, but I want to first ask, what got you into doing this kind of work?
Well, in 2009, unfortunately, my 17-year-old son decided to take his own life, which shocked both my family, myself, friends, community. Jesse was not the typical person that you would have thought of that would do that. So, I mean, he was a leader in school, academically, athletically, musically. So he was very, also very active in community. He had a job. So, he didn't fit your stereotypic picture of somebody who would decide to take their own life. He showed no symptoms of being depressed that we recognized at the time. So my biggest thing was trying to figure out why and wanting to do something to make meaning out of his death. And initially, all I could think of was doing a scholarship, and that's how we started. But over the 2-year time that we were getting that going, I started realizing that we needed to do more than just a scholarship. If we wanted to really address this issue, we needed to get a grassroots effort going for suicide education, because I was learning as I was reading and trying to understand the whys. And as I did that myself, I started seeing little things that clued me in that Jesse was depressed, that I didn't recognize before because I wasn't aware, and I thought, if I wasn't aware, there's probably lots of other people out there that don't know how to recognize this, in their loved ones. And if I can help them to do that and intervene before, something tragic happens, that would be what I'd want to do. So that's kind of what led me to start the suicide awareness and prevention portion of our mission.
And so why I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about this is because there is a higher percentage of folks who suffer from substance use disorder, who have co-occurring mental health concerns, particularly depression and anxiety. And there's by statistics and studies that there's a higher rate of suicide or suicide attempt or suicide ideation with folks who struggle with that and their family members as well.
Right.
And so with that in mind, as you said, you didn't see the signs and the whys to it. So what's sort of the early stages of your sort of awareness, or maybe your healing, your grieving, that you might want to share with our audience about this?
What really helped me, I think, in healing was more awareness. I mean, the more I learned and the more I understood where I think Jesse may have been at, that kind of helped me come up with a way of explaining why to myself, which always helps. I think also I put myself in therapy, traditional, talk therapy, and I tried all kinds of alternative things to try to help with the anxiety and of the trauma that I was feeling, such as yoga and Reiki. Those were the main ones that I used, and learned how to do meditation to try to, and breath work to try to, calm me down during certain episodes where I would really have high anxiety. I tried to share a lot of what I was learning as I went along as well, which the more that I came in contact with others that were suffering and found that talking about my own experience with them was helping them, I realized that in doing some sort of support group for those people who had lost a loved one to suicide, which I was part of through Yellow Ribbon at the time, was helping me. I figured when they dissolved that I would do that as well to help others, because I kind of had a way of talking with others that seemed to help them. So I started doing that. I then went to school to become a grief counselor, became certified in grief counseling to try to help me with that process too. So it's just, it's been a long road of recovery and learning for me. That's, I think, been the best way that I can say that's helped me to recover from that tragedy.
Yes, and it is a tragedy. And uh, professionals would suggest that there is, in the idea of prevention, there is things that our society and mental health providers and families and schools and the community can be aware of to lessen the impact. And of course, we have things like phone numbers that people can call, either the family members concerned about an individual or themselves, if they're in a dark place.
Right.
And so what I've learned from books and my own personal experience and training is that most families, if you have multiple, more than one or two people in a family, they tend to suffer alone in the aftermath of suicide. And it's only until they start sharing. I mean, I have a little phrase when I was a counselor: "He who talks gets the therapy." But yet, it's the nature of addiction as well, and other mental health concerns that typically it's a disease or a disease of isolation. And so healing really doesn't come until there is some initial connection.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've learned in grief counseling is one way to get over the trauma from an event is to repeatedly tell the story. And the more you tell the story, it lessens that stark impact that it had on you, because you start to get used to hearing it yourself as you retell it over and over again. So it helps with that trauma. And I think a lot of times with both addictions and mental health and suicide, people in the past have failed to talk about it due to stigma. I mean, most people believe that, those types of things made you look weak. What we're learning actually is those who have suffered like that and survived are actually very strong, because they've overcome a tremendous amount of pain, anxiety, and hardship in themselves to keep going. So that is one thing that I feel that the whole community has been better about fighting, is the stigma, talking more about mental health, talking more about substance abuse, and talking about suicide, I think has made an impact in lessening that stigma.
Yes, the stigma. I just recall how back in the 70s when I was in school, and 60s, first hearing of a friend, a schoolmate whose sibling had completed suicide, and how my sense was it was awkward to talk to that schoolmate or friend who about that. It was sort of like allow them the space, and it's just overly sensitive. And so then when my sister completed suicide coming up on 42 years ago next week, how I found people offered to talk to me as well. And that was again still in the 70s, later 70s. And how through healing and recovery, there was this stigma, this awkwardness about it. And it's messy work. One way I would describe it, that it's very uncomfortable. And even today, as much as I've had clients who completed suicide, I have friends that have completed suicide, how it still never goes away. That sort of uncomfortable awkwardness, you're going to say the wrong thing or something like that. And so in that way, what do you say to folks around that sort of dynamic that happens?
Well, I like you, I had a number of people that I don't think really knew how to approach me about it, and I could see the awkwardness in them. And a lot of times I'm a touchy-feely kind of person. I would just hug them and say, it's okay. You don't have to say anything. You being here and trying means a lot to me, to try to help them feel more comfortable with it and let them know that it's okay. I can talk about it. I've worked on this so that I can talk about it. So sometimes that was helpful to the people that were struggling with the stigma, I think. Not everybody. Some people you just can't reach, but
So in the aftermath, as you develop this Jesse Memorial Fund and this this fundraiser called Paddle.
Yes, Jesse's Paddle is our annual fundraiser that we typically have every third Saturday in July. And it's helped us to fund all the educational opportunities that we put out there for people to take, and everything else that we do. And this year, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we are going to try doing Jesse's virtual paddle. So we've moved everything online to be safe, so that we're not having a large gathering of people to worry about spreading this further. So that is a new thing for us. We're trying to learn how to do that and hope that it's successful. But we had in the past gotten together on the river at the canoe company in Snow Hill to paddle. We had live music, food, silent auction, and just an overall good time.
So you're doing this online. I saw the website, and you also have a Facebook presence with a Facebook page, and
right.
Encourage our viewers to go to your website, and we have it listed here. Also, that this is can be viewed on their YouTube channel for PAC 14, and so you can share this and get that information and check them out. And it looked like you had a lot of great resources on your website. I was looking at.
Yes, we've worked hard at that. We've actually put together our own resource guide that we put out there, and every year we revisit it and call everybody in it to see if they're still practicing or not, if they have any changes they need us to include. We try to find out about any new places out there that could be a possible resource that we didn't know about before and include that. So each time we printed, it gets a little bit thicker, but hopefully having that comprehensive resource guide has been helpful to a lot of folks, because there's so many different resources that are available that can be utilized, more than you would think.
Well, along those lines, it always seems when there's a celebrity, a public figure, suicide, and we know of a few notables here in the last couple of years, do you see an uptick in people coming to your face?
We do actually. There is a correlation there. Whenever there's an event or something that puts it in the public eye, there has been a direct increase in our number of views on the website and our Facebook page. Yes, I have seen that correlation.
So one stigma, then back to that sort of idea that it's there's a moral judgment. I think it comes with this, and the negative connotations that somebody took their lives. How when celebrities do that, do you see that the people that talk to you in conversation, or if you then are doing a public support group or the things like that you do, does the conversation change at all?
Uh, well, if I'm in my support group, for example, not really, because they're used to being there talking about that subject. I think I hear more people talk about it when I'm out and about than you normally would hear people talking about suicide. Only because I think it's a famous figure and somebody everybody knew, you know. But that, you know, it hasn't actually gotten the, I guess, response that you always hope for. You always hope if some famous person dies that it's going to bring the awareness bigger and stay longer, but it's kind of like a blip, you know, in the curve there. It does for a short period of time, at least.
So in this current time, because we're doing this show not in the studio, we're doing this by Zoom, has there been an uptick, and what's that been like for groups like yours?
Well, I know that the isolation has been very difficult for not only those who are suffering, but for everybody. From what I've read, the hotlines have had an increase in number of calls due to anxiety and depression, which I'm glad people were reaching out. The thing that struck me as odd is I kind of expected that there would probably be more suicidal ideation, which hasn't been seen according to the data that is coming out yet. I think we're all kind of wondering if that's just delayed or if there's enough online resources because everybody's doing everything online that they're able to get themselves through that way. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to explain that statistic. But I would say that this is certainly a time when that makes any population more vulnerable to suicide.
The increase in awareness over the decades, as I've been able to observe in you over the last dozen years or so, are you hopeful that there is, you mentioned it a little bit, that people seem to get a little more comfortable with it, but is there sort of like a tipping point or something that would really change the trajectory of why this is one of the leading causes of death for adolescents?
That's a tough question to answer. I think as a society today, with the social media especially, that our kids are self-isolating more because of that. And it's their way of communicating with one another is through devices more than in person today. And that is something that we're studying, obviously, that trend and how that will affect the future. But I think it also lends itself, because isolation is one of the key, warning signs and of depression. So is that link there? Is one causing the other or vice versa? These are questions that I'm hoping we'll get answers to over time. But yeah, that's it. I don't have that answer for you. I've wondered about it myself, but I see a trend that doesn't look positive because of how our young people are communicating today. As far as suicidal ideation is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm.
And my personal experience is that I've suffered from depression. It runs through generations in my family. There is a higher rate of that if you have generational history of depression, substance use disorder. And for me, how with depression, you don't care that you don't care.
Right.
and how I didn't go that one step further into suicide ideation, but I came to that threshold of I don't care whether I live or die. Not that I'm going to facilitate it.
Mhm.
And again, I've been in therapy and multiple support groups and over decades, and have a healthy support system. And when I got into that place a handful of times over the years, how isolation is real key. It's a warning sign for
Right.
me.
Mm-hmm.
And learn to have sort of guardrails around this.
Mm-hmm.
You got to take this stuff seriously.
Right.
People would have been shocked to know that if I had committed suicide, completed suicide. But I got to that spot, and they were shocked to hear that I considered that I didn't
Right.
care whether I lived or died. I didn't
Right.
care when I didn't care.
Can I ask you, did you actually get to the point where you were thinking you wanted to end the pain of mental anguish that you were suffering, and that was the only way that you thought maybe you could possibly do that?
I got right to the edge of that. Didn't
Right
go
to
over
the edge
the
of
edge.
that. Okay. Because they say that's where people are when they're having suicidal ideation.
Well,
It's
again,
more that they see that as the only answer, basically. Yeah.
well, we talked before about people who have had more than one attempt,
Right.
multiple attempts, and I have family members that like that. When you have finally engaged in some support and you get some tools, and so when you get kind of foundational with that, and I think a lot of times, especially adolescents who have not had enough life experience to have experiences with support groups or their faith community or
They don't have that toolbox. Right.
yes. And so over time, I guess what I'm trying to be is hopeful or hopeful to folks that if you've had these dark thoughts and feelings, or your family members have, that with armed with tools, you can stop it. You can intervene before you get there.
Right.
You know, there's a saying that you're only 2 or 3 bad decisions from fatality of something really awful.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is these tools, and so I'm saying I had some tools.
I've talked to some people who have been there, like yourself, and even those who have attempted, and they do, in wanting to recover and find some normalcy, find these tools that they can use, that when they feel a certain way or see themselves going down a certain road, they go, I need to dig that out. I need to do this to keep myself in balance and get back to where I want to be. And that tends to help them get through these crises that they repeatedly find themselves in, and have those tools readily available for them to reach out and utilize.
Yes, and I think what's real key to that is, like I say many times on this show about substance use disorder and also mental health, your brain has been hijacked. There is a chemical thing
Right.
going on,
Mm-hmm.
or lack of a chemical thing going on
Right.
in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's not your fault.
Right.
You
Mm-hmm.
take responsibility for the recovery path that you might take to get that support, but it showing up as it shows up, it's not your fault.
Right.
And there's no one to blame for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's empowering. I want to ask you another question before we wrap up here shortly, and that is, what about, there's a saying, there's a concept that active addiction can be called chronic suicide or symptomatic suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's people who are risk takers and doing lots of dangerous behaviors. And there's always been that question, particularly with addiction, like the whole opioid overdose concerned. And I've lost a stepson to an opioid overdose that might have been suicide. We don't know to this day if it was, or if it was the quantity of the drugs, the purity of it.
Right. There's definitely been scientific evidence of a link there between all of these things. It's hard to tell many times when there's been an overdose, especially if it was an intentional one or an accidental one.
Yeah.
And I think in either case, there's a person who is obviously taking whether it's alcohol or these drugs, to numb a pain or to escape a reality that they can't seem to get past. So is it, it's so tied together, it's hard to make that judgment call of after the fact saying this was a suicide or this wasn't.
This topic does deserve a lot of compassion and love and empathy
Yes.
and honesty and openness and willingness. So you certainly, I just get this sense that you, or know this sense that you are that, you epitomize that, and you do that kind of work.
Well, thank you. I hope I do. That's what I want to do.
You do, and I feel it.
I feel that suicide is preventable as long as there's a caring person in the right place at the right time. And all we have to do is notice our fellow man and notice when someone's suffering and feel like we can reach out and just be there for them. And it doesn't take an expert and it doesn't take a doctor to save someone. It's like you can do CPR to help prevent somebody from dying from a heart attack. I'm saying that we can use our own empathy and words to keep somebody safe.
What would you last want to say to our audience that's watching this and the work that you do and that might offer some hope or support?
I would just say that if you're someone suffering or you're a family member, just do for yourself what you can in education. Educate yourself to all of these things. Read as much as you can. Take whatever classes are out there. We offer all of ours for free. So I think that really helps people to get their head wrapped around what their situation is and then allow them to consider what steps they need to take to keep everybody safe. If you go to our website, www.jessiespaddle.org, we do have a tab for resources where we have our resource guide. And I also want to make you aware that we will pay for you to take classes to learn more about what you can do to help somebody through a crisis situation when they're feeling suicidal. There's mental health first aid. There is Safe Talk. There is Assist, which is applied suicide intervention skills trainings. All of these trainings are really good trainings that help you practice and learn what you can do to help out. We will post on our Facebook page and we do emails and newsletters that let you know when classes are coming up so that you can sign up.
So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to hear about the important work that you're doing.
Thank you, Perry.
And
thanks for reaching out.
And we do have the information here that people can access at your website, your Facebook page, also the local crisis hotline phone number for themselves or for an individual. So again, I want to thank everybody that watched this episode today about this important topic around self-harm and suicide, and during these more isolated times that our society is in, as well as once we're on the other side of this, that there is support, there is resources, you can get help. It's a medical issue, and there is a lot of love and support out there. And so super encourage you to take advantage of that support that's out here. And thank you again for watching another episode of Recovery Today.